today's webinar, we'll be looking at Norming's Resource Manager and to cover all your purchase order, receipt, and invoice workflows. Now, this setup is going to be focused on the service industry, where the purchase order line details will be for non-stock items and services. However, Resource Manager is also applicable for people using stock items and items that may become fixed assets later on. I'll be keeping this webinar short and to the point. So I'll start with some background and some basic product overview, followed by highlights and features of the product before finally showing you the application in action. So Norming themselves, they've been a key third-party developer of Sage for over 18 years. Their add-on software has received multiple awards and recommendations worldwide. They have the recommended module for fixed assets for Sage 300 and a complete solution that covers all aspects of resource management. We've been working with Norming software for years, and they're a trusted partner with software solutions filling in the gaps to the core Sage 300 product. Now, Resource Manager, what is it? Well, it's an on-premise solution that is installed and activated as any standard Sage 300 module. It includes a back-end application, which is module in Sage 300, has the same look and feel as all the other core modules. There's also a web-based front-end application, and this is where the majority of your buyers will be spending their time. In addition to this, there's also a mobile app that's available on Android and iOS as well. Resource Manager, so it's a large product that has the ability to handle expenses, leave, AP invoices and payment requisitions, sales quotations, PJC project scheduling and planning, and as we'll be covering today, the purchase order lifecycle from requisition, receiving to invoicing. Now, all of this functionality is available through both the backend and the web interfaces. In the systems, document attachment is supported, and that's supported throughout the system, right? So things like in an expense claim, you can attach a photo of the receipt using your phone's camera or upload any image, and that attachment is available with the document and record anywhere in the system as it passes through its transactional phase. So let's get through to the features and highlights. As mentioned, Resource Manager has multiple interfaces. There's a Sage 300 backend, web-based and mobile app as well. The majority of entries will be occurring through your web-based UI. The web-based UI, as you can see, is quite an intuitive and flexible interface. You can hide all necessary fields, making fields read-only or fully editable. This functionality can be tailored down to specific users as well. So you could have some users that can change tag classes, while other users that tax class field is disabled. And you could also segregate this function by submitter and approval. So this gives you a scenario where the submitter might be able to attach documents, whereas the approver can only view those attachments. Now, the Resource Manager has a seamless integration into Sage 300, right? So all approved requests flow directly into the relative Sage 300 core modules. This removes duplicate manual entry and any sort of errors from human handling. The integration for Resource Manager covers things like the PO requisition order, receipt, and PO invoice entry. It works with inventory, and for people that don't have the inventory module, it will also work with your PO items and non-stock items as well. It also integrates with project job costing for job-related purchases and job budgeting and estimates. It integrates with the AP module, and that includes vendor details, vendor contract pricing, any sort of AP payments, and any sort of payment terms that the vendor may have. Integration with the GL module as well. So it includes GL budgeting. It includes real-time budgeting, so you can see your spending versus budget at any point in time. And with the GL budgeting, you can apply any sort of warnings, errors, or any sort of workflow rules around what happens when we exceed that budget on the GL account. It's also fully integrates with common services. So this includes things like tax services and calculations, and it fully supports multi-currency. At the core of the product, we've got the workflow engine itself. Now, the workflow engine is quite a robust and flexible engine, which allows you to cover any sort of scenario, no matter how complex. So you can set up your system into, say, divisions, departments, cost centers, and their managers, and you can set up employee supervisors as well. All of these roles and delegations can be used within the workflow to route the document to the required approvers. Now, for any complex requirements, there are custom roles and variables that are available. And this also extends to any sort of customized validation rules, so like ensuring that the correct vendor or budget codes are selected at the point of entry. The workflow engine can also email and notify users that documents are awaiting approval and that the requisition has been approved or rejected. And these email templates can be customized by you and very simple to customize, allowing standard mail merge sort of functionality, so you can dynamically add information into that email template. Another great feature of the workflow engine is for any sort of approved purchase orders, you can specify multiple recipients of that mail out, as you can see in that screenshot bottom left. Now, what this allows you to do is you can email any sort of support documents or attachments to submitters, to vendors, to specific accounts. You can include your standard crystal report attachment, so that's your standard PO form that you're currently using inside of Sage 300. You can attach any sort of terms and conditions or any sort of Christmas closure information. And as you can see below in the example, we've got a submitter, a specified email address, so the accounts here at Aptus Business, and the vendor. Each three of those email addresses will be receiving a report file, but the vendor's email template is a little bit different to the submitter's and the specified email template. So the vendor would have a purchase order waiting with the attachment, whereas the submitter and the specified email address will be just a generic internal Office document message. The workflow engine also has reminders, daily, weekly, however many frequency you want, about delayed approvals, and these can arrive via email or notification on the mobile app. This ensures that your purchase requisitions are approved on time and that the approvers are notified that, yes, there are requisitions waiting to be approved. Now, regarding the approvers, enabled approvers can temporarily delegate their approval authority to other users. So this is handy if they go on leave. And the great thing about that is they can delegate their authority in advance, and they can stack it all up. So if they know what their leave is for the whole year, they can create rules saying, I want to delegate authority to this approver between the dates of X and Y, and the system will automatically apply that rule. The approver, the original approver, will also receive that approval message, but so will the temporary approver as well. So either or can approve the scenario. So on to the actual demo itself. Here's the standard backend interface. So it looks and feels just like any sort of Sage 300 module. Your finance team can have access to this. This uses your standard licensing, your land pack licensing, as you have now. The other interface, and this is where all your buyers will be spending their time in, is the actual web-based interface. The web-based interface is quite an intuitive interface. I'll just sign in as a buyer. And as you can see, I've removed a lot of the capabilities of the program, just focusing on core specifics for this buyer, which is the purchase order requisition to invoice, the AP invoice, and AP payments. Now, what I'll start by is raising a PO. I'll then receipt it, and then I'll finally invoice that purchase order. And I'll stop along the way to highlight some nice features of the system. So onto the actual purchase requisition. We sign in and we can see the user interface. On the far left, we have the documentations in their various stages. So we can see that we have one for approval, which is there. We have two that are approved and waiting to be synchronized into Sage 300. And here are my previous three that I've done in the past. So I'll start by just creating a brand new purchase order requisition here. And we can have multiple purchase types here. And this can be limited by, this can be filtered by specific users. So a purchase type could be maybe set projects or set sort of purchase requisitions that you want to set up with some defaults and specific GL accounts and vendors. And you can set up rules where, okay, buyer search can only see these 3 types, whereas a secondary buyer, maybe they can only see a POR limited in our example here. So what I'll do is I'll just select a limited GL accounts. That way you can see what the filters actually do. Rather than showing all of my vendors, it's only limiting to these 3 vendors, and it's defaulted my Intercontinental Electronics vendor. So it makes entry quite easy. You've got your standard Sage 300 fields for purchase requisitions, where descriptions, references, notes, that sort of thing. You've got all your line item details below. So for a non-stock item, I'm just going to enter in item X, maybe coffee beans. With our GL accounts, the GL accounts in the background, you can either select all GL accounts or specific GL accounts. And if you filter by, and if you set specific GL accounts, you have the ability to filter by your GL account segments. So in my scenario, I've only selected the sales accounts for the wholesale division. And that's really all I'll see in my GL account listing. So it does provide the flexibility for limiting the scope of GL accounts. So, standard sort of stuff, we select an account, we add our quantity, add our unit costs. This will go through and calculate the correct taxes for that particular vendor. You can specify an arrival date. There's a whole other stack of line detail fields here that are available in the back end. But for this demo, I've just shown what we actually need. Now, we can add comments and instructions per line detail, and it's just a standard Sage sort of functionality of we add a comment, we add an instruction, we insert it in there, and it gets passed into Sage 300 as per norm. I'll just add another line detail here as well. Let's go, say, bean grinder, and this one is going to be, let's say, it's an expensive model and $500. Maybe let's order 2 means. Actually, let's order 100 beans here. Right. So we've got the ability to add attachments, any sort of documents, any PDFs, any sort of file that you're after. I might just add our terms and conditions as an attachment. Notes T and C. Hit that. Now, this document is available throughout the whole lifecycle process of this form. So when it hits the approver, they can go in and see what the terms and conditions are, and all of these documents can be passed on anywhere else into the system. So here's my basic line detail. I've got 2 line details, purchase order there. I'll save this out. Now, by saving it, this hasn't actually hit Sage 300, so I can leave this, go out, have my lunch break, come back, resume, add any extra details I want from here. On the fly, at any time, I can check the budgets. And as we can see, I actually haven't set up any budgets for these GL accounts, but it integrates directly into your standard GL budget account. So 4060-300, and I'll just show you how quick and easy and how real time this actually is. Where's the budget? Maintenance, here we go. 4060-300. Sorry about that, guys. 4060-300. And yep, and let's just do a fixed amount of $50,000. At 2, bam. Right, we've got a full spread, $50,000 in the background. Just go back to our document, hit our budgets. There we go. So now we've got some meaningful data here. We've got a budget amount of 50,000, pending amount, available amount, this requisition, sums it up, splits it by multiple lines. And as I mentioned, you can set up workflow rules around the budget. So what do we do when it's approaching 20%, the budget or exceeding the budget. You can set up warnings, just notifying the user that's the budget's exceeded, or we can fully halt and stop and throw an error and say, no, no more expense on that. So I'm just going to pass it through the actual workflow itself. And at this stage, it's telling me that the GL account for line 2 is invalid. Perfect. So as you can see, that's my default non-stop account, not valid for this scenario. I'll just set up sales again, use that same account, and submit that through. Perfect. So now the document, as we can see, the status is awaiting approval. At any point in time, you can see the approval trail. So we can see that it's going to my supervisor in this setup here, and that's Aptus, Aptus Solution as the supervisor. So at this stage, the approval would be receiving an email or maybe a push notification on its mobile phone to actually action this approval. I'll jump in as the actual user Aptus, and I'll show you what they see. Right, now they have access to all the modules. So as you can see here, the desktop, like I said, this is program fully featured. I won't be covering any of these grey ones today, but just know that the homepage here can scale towards whatever you want to see, depending on your licenses. As you can see, drawing attention here to the approved list, there's 2 approved. There'll be one from just then and probably one from a little bit earlier. Now here we can see we've got 2 approvals. We can search by, filter this selection by search. There will actually be 2 here by search, no doubt. But we can maybe filter by the vendor name or the vendor ID. We can bulk approve this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to dive in there, because maybe as the approver, I'm not too sure what our budget is. I can have a look at the form. I can see the attachments here with our terms of pricing. Download it, view it. If I like, I can see what the budget is there. Yep, it all looks fine. And I can go through and actually approve or reject this. Now, as I mentioned earlier, depending if you've set up leave or any sort of transfers, you have an ability to transfer these approval process to somebody else. So maybe it's hit the wrong cost center manager. They've got the ability to transfer it on. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to approve it. All okay. You can add comments, and those comments will live with the document for auditing purposes. So that's been approved. Depending on how you've set up your workflow engine, the submitter may have received a message saying it's been approved, and it sits in the to approve queue. Now, the integration in the background, what we have here in Resource Manager is you can see all of the purchase requisitions that are sitting in the queue. Now, this process can be automated, but to hurry this demo along, I'm just going to manually post these transactions. So we can see that this has been approved. I'm going to post this through. And what it's going to do is create an actual requisition within Sage 300. Now, in the Sage 300 PO module. Now, you have the ability to either create these documents as a PO requisition, or in this setup, we're creating them as a straight purchase order document. What I'm going to do now is jump into the actual receipting process. And the purchase order receipting process, this is where your 3-way document matching basically goes, because we've raised the requisition for our coffee beans and grinders. We're now going to receipt the goods and then finally invoice the goods. And the invoice relates to an actual PO receipt. The advantage of the 3-way matching is that you can ensure that the goods and services have been delivered, and then the person that's actually doing the PO invoicing process knows that they have been delivered. So once again, we're in the receipt requisition screen. We can search by our actual vendor number, and I think they were electronics, weren't they? Yeah, it's part of electronics. Perfect. We can have a look at those PO numbers. There it is. So my requisition, today's date. Perfect. If we're not sure what it is, drill into the actual document itself, opens up the original purchase order, see the attachment. Oh, yeah, this was for the coffee grinder and the beans. Standard Sage 100 functionality of how many did we receive. Let's say we actually received all of them, and we're still awaiting the actual grinder. So the logic is exactly the same. It has all of the taxes. Being sample company, it has our American taxes, but if you're dealing in Australia, you'll have GST, and if you're selling alcohol, you might have a wet tax as well. You can view any sort of comments attaching to this. You can add any further comments you want to this line detail. What I'm going to do is write, yep, all good, received, well, received first. All right, perfect. Add any additional attachments to this actual receipt. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to submit this through and watch it pass through. Now, in my scenario, the receiving purchase bypass the approval because everything's within our rules. What you can do though is I'm just going to jump back into the back end, and with our actual receipting types, we can set up workflow rules around the actual over receiving functionality. So if we can check to see if the receipt is over 10%, or whether the amount is over 10%, or actually an actual fixed amount. If we're receiving goods for the amount that's maybe over 10%, what do we do? Do we do a warning? Do we do an error? Do we issue any sort of checks or any sort of workflow rules? So at the receipt purchase, you can implement your workflow rules depending on, like out of the box here, we can do our over receiving check. But if you have more exotic rules, the workflow engine can definitely account for that and route it to the required approvers. So that's the receiving purchase. Once again, this sort of thing will happen automatically in the background. I'm just going to push it along. This is essentially a final check. You can have your finance team sitting here in the background, and at the end of the day, they have the final say of whether or not all those approved purchases from the portal will actually go inside of Stage 300's purchase order module. So I'm going to say yes, post our receipt. That's going to go in. That's now receipt 004. That is in our purchase order system. And we can see right here the receipt entry. It's in there. Seamless integration. And we've got our coffee beans here for 100 units. So standard functionality from the website to the back end. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and invoice this actual receipt. So in our invoice requisition list, we'll just go through and actually add that vendor invoice number in the VA or whatever that vendor specified. We know that it's from our electronics vendor store, and what it will do is it will filter that particular vendor's all of their receipts that are related to that vendor. I'll just sort by the ones that are not completed. So I'll just, for brevity, I'll just go through and actually fully receive this, fully invoice this. At this stage, this is where, if there's any sort of additional costs incurred, you can add it here. Any sort of further attachments, maybe just attach the actual original invoice. You can do it there as well. At this point in time, your financial team might say, well, whoever's entering the invoice, there may be additional, the unit cost change. They can update the unit cost here. And at this point, you can also set tolerances around, we accept all invoices that are within 2%. That's all fine. As soon as it's greater than 2%, off to a workflow, back to the original submitter, then through the approval process again. So at any point in time, you can initiate that workflow engine. I'm just going to submit this through, and that's it. We can see our approval trail. In this case, it goes to my supervisor for a final approval before it goes into our Sage 300 accounting system. Very quickly, I'll just jump in as that Aptus business user, approve it. You can see that they've got two to approve purchase requisitions, but we're interested in our invoice requisition. So here it is there. Hey, you know what? Serge's a great guy. I don't even have to look at it. I'll just approve it right here now. All good. That's gone through. I only have one thing to do. You know what? I'll deal with this one later on. And that's really what the approver's role is there. Now, that's the PO lifecycle from receipt, from requisition, receipt, and invoice. I'm going to quickly touch on AP invoice, requisition, and AP payments. I'm not going to go through the full workflows for these, but just know that it's the same as before. I'll just show you the screens and any sort of interesting features that we hit along the way. Once again, so here we are in the invoice requisition. You can have different requisition types, and once again, this can be lots of different users. So maybe half of your finance team can only see a certain type of requisition, and this influences the workflows, and the other half will see another type of requisition. Standard Sage 300 sort of stuff, where pick a vendor, what's their document number, supplied, any sort of description, anything here on back order. It automatically does all your distribution codes and pre-fills any sort of business rules that you've set up around that vendor with their AP invoice functionality inside of Sage 300. Optional fields definitely supports it. Here are all of our optional fields in Sage 300. Flows through as per norm. I'm just going to remove all these because we don't really need those optional fields for ours. But you can see how flexible it is. You can remove, insert all your optional fields as you go along. Once again, add any sort of attachments that you need. Select your GL accounts, your standard AP invoice functionality that you know and you've been using inside of Sage 300. What this now enables is a workflow process around the AP invoice requisition entry. And also, it's web-based, so you can access this from anywhere that you have publicly accessible URL to this particular service and server. So once again, it's the standard amount of enter your amounts, 10, and hit submit, and it will probably go through the whole approval process. Perfect. So there's our approval trail. Where does it go? To my supervisor. But once again, standard workflow engine applies. So whatever you guys have set up for your AP invoice records, it will follow that. All of these screens, all of these fields, you can show and hide for specific users, for specific groups. Very easy to set up, very easy to maintain. And once again, you can set fields to be read-only or editable for some users, or just totally hide it altogether for other users. That's the AP invoice requisition process. And if that were to be approved, that will flow into Sage 300 AP invoice, standard functionality, continue on with that invoice process from there. The AP payment, and this will be the last thing I'll be looking at. Now, the AP payment, the screen, very simple to understand. We pick our vendors. I'll pick on Excite batteries. Here are all of their documents. Here are all the current balances. What do we want to see? Invoices, debit, credit notes, prepayments, order by. Sure, we can specify starting document number. We can go through and apply. Yeah, we'll apply this invoice, and this invoice. We're flagging that it's going to be $1,000 for payment. Multi-currency. If you have it set up, you have the option to select that there. Enter any sort of attachments. Maybe you want to enter the original invoices here, whatever you want to do. Quite an intuitive interface. If you're not looking to apply the full amount, edit that field. We're only going to pay $50 for this one. We've got a net balance of 77. Perfect. I'm just going to submit that through. And now what happens is it's off to the workflow engine to Aptus Business for approval. So that could be my accounts payable control. Once this is synchronized into Sage 300, it goes in as your payment entry, and then it can continue on its life cycle. So that's a rough overview of the norming resource manager solution.